The starship Horizon's Edge drifted silently through the endless darkness of space, carrying 300 human souls toward a meeting that would decide the fate of their entire species. Commander Daniel Harper stood at the observation deck, watching the massive space station grow larger through the window. The Galactic Council headquarters was a ring of metal and light stretching across thousands of miles. Home to 17 ancient civilizations that had ruled the known galaxy for 50,000 years, humanity had finally received an invitation. After decades of sending signals into the void and building ships capable of reaching distant stars, the Council had acknowledged their existence. This was supposed to be a moment of celebration. Instead, Daniel felt a deep unease settling in his chest when Ambassador Lisa Grant joined him at the window. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many failed negotiations during her career. She had spent 30 years representing Earth in conflicts between nations. Now she carried the weight of representing Earth to the entire universe. "They want us to send one person for evaluation," she said quietly. "Just one person to represent all of humanity." Daniel turned to face her. "And they will judge our entire species based on that single individual? That is their tradition? They have done this for every new species that seeks membership in the galactic community. One representative is scanned, tested, and measured. Based on the results, our civilization receives a classification that will determine our place in the galaxy for generations to come." The absurdity of it struck Daniel immediately. How could anyone judge billions of people based on a single example? But humanity had no power here. They were newcomers knocking on the door of an ancient house, hoping to be let inside. The man chosen for this impossible task was already waiting in the conference room. His name was John Morrison, and by every standard measurement, he was completely ordinary. He was 42 years old, slightly overweight, with thinning brown hair and glasses that he constantly adjusted when he was nervous. He worked as a systems engineer at a manufacturing plant in Cleveland, Ohio. He had never served in the military. He had never held political office. He had never done anything that would make him stand out in a crowd. That was precisely why the Vestivers Selection Committee had chosen him. They wanted the council to see an average human, someone who represented what most people were actually like, rather than some exceptional outlier. John looked up when Daniel and Lisa entered the room. His hands were shaking slightly, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had not slept well during the long journey. "I still do not understand why you picked me," John said. "There are scientists, athletes, artists, leaders. Any of them would make a better impression than I would." Lisa sat down across from him. "We do not want to make an impression, John. We want to show them the truth. You are a good man. You work hard. You care about your family and your community. That is what humanity actually looks like." John shook his head slowly. "And if that is not good enough for them?" Nobody had an answer for that question. The next morning, John Morrison walked alone into the council chambers. The room was vast beyond comprehension, a circular space that seemed to stretch upward forever. Seats rose in tiers around the central platform, filled with beings that defied human understanding. Some were made of crystal that pulsed with inner light. Others resembled insects grown to monstrous size. A few looked almost human, but with skin in shades of blue and purple. The High Arbiter Zeth Kara descended from the highest tier. He was a Velthari, a being composed entirely of living crystal that chimed softly with each movement. His form was roughly humanoid, but his face had no features except for 2 points of brilliant light where eyes should have been. "You are the human representative," Zeth Kara said. His voice echoed strangely, as if coming from everywhere at once. John swallowed hard. "Yes, my name is John Morrison. Your name is irrelevant. Only your measurements matter." The assessment began immediately. Machines emerged from the floor and surrounded John. bathing him in light that tingled against his skin. For 3 days, he was scanned, prodded, tested, and questioned. They measured his physical strength, which was unremarkable. They tested his mental abilities, which were above average, but nowhere near exceptional. They searched for psychic potential, which did not exist. They examined his lifespan, which was tragically short by galactic standards. On the 4th day, the council assembled to hear the results. Daniel and Lisa were permitted to stand in a small observation area at the edge of the chamber. Too far away to speak, but close enough to witness the verdict. Hi. Arbiter Zethkar's crystal form pulsed with cold light as he addressed the assembly. The human specimen has been fully evaluated. Physical capability falls within the lowest acceptable range. Cognitive function is adequate, but unremarkable. Psychic potential is non-existent. Projected species lifespan is insufficient for meaningful contribution to galactic civilization. John stood alone on the central platform, feeling smaller with each word. Based on these findings, Zethkar continued, the Galactic Council classifies humanity as a Category 7 species. This is the lowest possible ranking. Earth and its associated colonies will be assigned to the peripheral territories. They will be denied access to galactic trade routes, advanced technology sharing, and council protection. They pose no threat, offer no value, and warrant no further attention. The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. She gripped the railing in front of her, knuckles turning white. Decades of diplomatic experience told her to remain calm, to accept the verdict gracefully and work to change it over time. But something in her chest burned with an unfamiliar anger. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder. We need to get John out of there. They collected their representative from the chamber floor. John's face was pale, his eyes distant. He had walked into that room hoping to secure humanity's future. Instead, he had been told that his entire species was worthless dot as they made their way back to the horizon's edge. John finally spoke. They did not ask me anything that mattered. They measured my body. They tested my brain. But they never asked what I believed in. They never asked what I would sacrifice for the people I love. They never asked what humanity does when our backs are against the wall. Lisa looked at him with new appreciation. Would those answers have changed their verdict? John Morrison stopped walking. He turned to face the massive council station one last time, and something hardened in his expression. No, he said quietly. But someday they will wish they had asked. None of them understood the weight of those words. The council had made their assessment based on what John Morrison was in that moment, a middle-aged engineer from Ohio with nothing special to offer. What they failed to measure was what he was capable of becoming when everything he loved was threatened. That oversight would cost them more than they could possibly imagine. 6 months passed after the assessment, and John Morrison returned to his old life in Cleveland. He went back to work at the manufacturing plant, fixing machines and solving problems like he had done for 20 years. His coworkers asked about his trip to the stars, and he gave them short answers that revealed nothing about the humiliation he had experienced at night. He sat alone in his small apartment and watched the news feeds from across human space. The colony worlds were growing despite the council's verdict. New Providence had just celebrated its 5th anniversary, with over 200,000 people now calling it home. His younger sister Amanda lived there with her husband and 2 children. She sent him video messages every week, showing the kids playing in the red dust of their new world. John kept every single message saved on his personal device. On difficult nights, he would watch them again and again, reminding himself that humanity was building something beautiful out there among the stars. Then the Dravok came. The first attack happened without warning on a Tuesday morning. John was eating breakfast when the emergency broadcast interrupted every screen on Earth. The Dravok hegemony, a military empire that operated outside council jurisdiction, had launched a massive invasion of the peripheral territories. 3 human colony worlds had already fallen. New Providence was one of them. John dropped his coffee cup. It shattered against the floor, but he did not notice. His eyes were fixed on the screen, watching footage of ships descending through burning skies. The Dravok were reptilian creatures, 7 feet tall with armored scales, and a culture built entirely around conquest. They had been expanding their territory for centuries, and now they had found new victims. For 3 days, John tried to contact his sister. Every communication channel was blocked or destroyed. On the 4th day, a partial transmission made it through the interference. Amanda's face appeared on his screen, dirty and terrified, with her children crying in the background. "John, please, we need help. They are killing everyone. The council will not respond to our emergency calls. They say we are outside their protection zone. Please, someone has to help us. Please." The transmission cut off. John never heard from his sister again. He was not alone in his grief. Across Earth and every human settlement, families received similar messages or no messages at all. The death toll climbed into the millions. The Dravok were not interested in conquest. They were interested in extermination. They saw humans as weak creatures occupying space that could be put to better use. Ambassador Lisa Grant demanded an emergency meeting with the Galactic Council. She traveled back to their massive station and stood in the same chamber where John had been evaluated. Her request was simple. Humanity needed help. The council had the power to stop the Dravok with a single word. "Hi." Arbiter Zethkar's response was delivered without emotion. The Galactic Council does not intervene in conflicts involving Category 7 species. Your classification was determined by proper assessment procedures. The human representative demonstrated no exceptional qualities that would warrant protection. This matter falls outside our mandate. Lisa stared at the crystalline being with disbelief. Millions of people are dying. Children are being slaughtered. And you refuse to help because one man did not pass your tests? The tests are accurate, Zethkar replied. Your species demonstrated trivial capabilities. Trivial species do not receive council resources. This policy has maintained galactic stability for 50,000 years. We will not change it for you. Lisa returned to Earth with nothing but rage in her heart. Commander, Daniel Harper contacted John Morrison 1 week after the invasion began. The call came late at night, waking John from restless sleep filled with nightmares about his sister's final message. They cited your assessment specifically, Daniel said without greeting. The council told Ambassador Grant that your results proved humanity was not worth saving. They use you as their excuse to let millions of our people die. John sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of those words pressed down on him like a physical force. He had known that his evaluation had consequences, but hearing it stated so plainly made something shift inside him. What do you want me to do about it? He finally asked. The Unified Defense Initiative is holding a meeting tomorrow. Director Kevin Barnes has gathered every scientist, engineer, and military strategist we have. They need people who understand systems, who know how to make complicated things work together. Lisa suggested your name. John almost laughed. I build manufacturing equipment. I am not a soldier or a scientist. Neither were most of the people who changed history, Daniel replied. Will you come? The meeting took place in an underground facility beneath the Swiss Alps. John arrived to find over 300 people gathered in a massive auditorium. Kevin Barnes stood at the front. A former admiral in his 60s with white hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his entire life preparing for the worst. The council has abandoned us, Kevin began without preamble. The Dravok have taken 4 more colonies since last week. Our current military capabilities are insufficient to stop them. By standard galactic projections, we should need 300 years to develop weapons capable of matching an established empire like the Dravok. He paused, letting that number sink in. We do not have 300 years. We do not have 30 years. I am asking all of you to help me build a fleet that can save our species in 10 years or less. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The task sounded impossible. Every historical example suggested that developing advanced military technology required centuries of incremental progress. The Council had deemed humanity trivial precisely because they lacked the time and resources to catch up. John raised his hand. Kevin nodded in his direction. The Council measured individuals, John said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. They tested one person in isolation and declared all of us worthless based on what that one person could do alone. But humans do not work alone. We never have. Every great thing our species has accomplished happened because people worked together, shared ideas, built on each other's discoveries. He stood up from his seat. They want to know what I can do by myself? Almost nothing. But if you give me 1,000 engineers connected through the same network, sharing every breakthrough in real time, we can do things that the Council has never seen. That is what they missed. That is what we need to show them. Kevin Barnes studied the middle-aged engineer from Cleveland for a long moment. He saw nothing exceptional in the man's appearance. But he heard something in those words that reminded him why he had dedicated his life to protecting humanity. Then let us get to work, Kevin said. The great mobilization began that night. And the Galactic Council, watching from their distant station, had no idea what they had just unleashed. The next 8 years transformed humanity in ways that no species had ever experienced before. Every nation on Earth set aside ancient conflicts and joined together under a single purpose. Factories that once built cars began producing ship components. Universities that once competed for prestige began sharing every discovery instantly across global networks. Children grew up learning that their generation would either save their species or watch it disappear forever. John Morrison became the unlikely center of this transformation. He never held an official title or commanded any troops. Instead, he built systems. He created networks that connected millions of minds across dozens of worlds, allowing ideas to flow like water through pipes. A scientist on the moon could have a breakthrough at midnight and see it implemented in a Mars shipyard by dawn. Dr. Samantha Price was one of the first to understand what John had created. She ran the Lunar Research Station, a small facility that had previously struggled to get funding for basic experiments. Now her team had direct connections to every other research group in human space. When her engineers discovered a new method for strengthening ship armor, the design files were transmitted to 17 different manufacturing centers within the hour. You did not invent anything new, Samantha told John during one of his visits to the station. You just removed the walls between us. Scientists have always been possessive of their work, protective of their discoveries. Your network makes sharing feel natural, even necessary. John shrugged. I am not smart enough to solve these problems myself. I just figured out how to let smart people work together without getting in each other's way. That simple philosophy spread throughout the mobilization effort. Barriers between disciplines dissolved. Military strategists worked directly with physicists. Artists collaborated with engineers to design ships that were not only functional but inspiring. Psychologists helped assembly line workers cope with the stress of knowing that every component they built might save or doom their species. The first warships rolled out of the orbital shipyards above Earth 3 years ahead of schedule. They were crewed by galactic standards, ugly boxes of metal bristling with weapons. But they worked. Lieutenant Christopher Lane, a young pilot fresh from the training academy, flew one of the prototypes through its first combat simulation and declared it the most responsive craft he had ever handled. "She does not look like much," Christopher reported, "but she moves like she knows what I want before I tell her." That intuitive connection between human and machine became the hallmark of Earth's new fleet. Unlike the Council species, who relied on rigid protocols and standardized procedures, human ships were designed to adapt. They learned from their pilots. They adjusted to changing conditions in real time. They became extensions of the people who flew them. Admiral Patricia Coleman took command of the growing fleet. She was a small woman in her 50s, with silver hair cut short and eyes that had witnessed 3 decades of human space exploration. She had lost her son when the Dravok destroyed the colony where he was stationed. That loss drove her with an intensity that frightened some of her subordinates. "We will not just survive," Patricia told her captains during their first strategic meeting. "We will make them regret every single life they took. We will show them that hurting humanity was the worst decision they ever made." The Council watched these developments with growing concern. Their analysts had predicted that humanity would fragment under pressure, as every other trivial species had done when faced with extinction. Instead, the humans seemed to grow stronger with each passing month. More unified, more determined. High Arbiter Zethkar requested regular reports on human activity. Each one made him more uncomfortable than the last. The manufacturing output alone defied explanation. Humans were building ships at a rate that should have been impossible for their population size and technological level. They are cheating somehow, the Krenagian representative declared during a closed council session. No trivial species could achieve this rate of development. They must have found forbidden technology or made contact with outside powers. Zethkar was not convinced. He had studied the censored data carefully. Humans were not using alien technology. They were using their own innovations, combined and refined through methods that the Council had never encountered. They were not cheating. They were cooperating at a scale that the Galactic community had simply never seen before. 8 years after the mobilization began, Admiral Patricia Coleman led a fleet of 200 ships toward the Dravok-controlled system designated Kepler's Gate. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy had assembled 800 vessels there, confident that their numerical superiority would crush any human resistance. John Morrison watched the battle unfold from the command center on Earth. He was not a military man and could not affect the outcome, but he had helped design the communication systems that allowed Patricia to coordinate her forces in real time. Every ship in her fleet received updates simultaneously. Every captain knew exactly what every other captain was doing at any given moment. The Dravok attacked in standard formation, expecting the humans to respond with predictable defensive patterns. Instead, Patricia's fleet moved like a single organism with 200 bodies. Ships flowed around enemy formations, exploiting gaps that appeared for mere seconds. Weapons fire from one group created openings that another group immediately filled. Christopher Lane, now a full captain commanding his own cruiser, led a strike force directly into the heart of the Dravok formation. His ships danced through enemy fire with movements that seemed almost impossible. When Dravok commanders tried to adapt, they found that the humans had already anticipated their adjustments. The battle lasted 11 hours. When it ended, the Dravok fleet had been completely destroyed. Admiral Patricia Coleman had lost 18 ships and 400 crew members. She mourned every single one of them. But she had also proven something that the entire galaxy needed to see. The trivial species from Earth had just defeated a force 4 times their size without any assistance from the Galactic Council. News of the victory spread across known space within days. Species that had never heard of humanity suddenly wanted to learn more about these strange creatures who had defied every prediction. The Council received thousands of inquiries from civilizations, asking how a Category 7 species had accomplished what even Category 3 species could not. HFY had no answers for them. But deep within his crystalline mind, a terrible realization was beginning to form. The Council had not simply miscalculated when they assessed humanity. They had fundamentally failed to understand what they were measuring, and that failure was going to have consequences that none of them could yet imagine. The Dravok hegemony fell apart within 2 years of their defeat at Kepler's Gate. Their empire had been built on fear, on the assumption that conquered species would never find the strength to fight back. Humanity proved an assumption fatally wrong. Admiral Patricia Coleman led campaign after campaign into Dravok territory. She did not seek revenge, though she had every right to demand it. Instead, she offered surrender terms that were remarkably generous. Any Dravok military unit that laid down weapons would be treated with dignity. Any civilian population that welcomed human forces would receive food, medicine, and protection. Many Dravok accepted these terms. They had grown tired of serving an empire that cared nothing for their lives. Their emperor, a brutal tyrant named Vexkar, who had ruled through violence for 6 centuries, found his support crumbling faster than he could respond. Captain Gregory Walsh led the strike team that finally captured Vexkar. They found him hiding in an underground bunker beneath his palace, surrounded by guards who surrendered without firing a single shot. The emperor, who had ordered the deaths of millions of humans, was bound and transported to New Providence, rebuilt on the graves of its original inhabitants, to stand trial for his crimes. John Morrison did not attend the trial. He stayed on Earth, working on the same systems he had built during the mobilization. The war was ending, but he knew that victory over the Dravok was not the end of humanity's struggle. The Galactic Council still existed. Their flawed assessment still defined humanity's place in the universe, and they had done more than simply abandon humanity to the Dravok. Intelligence gathered during the war had revealed something terrible. Hidden communications between Council representatives and Dravok officials showed that the invasion had not been a surprise to everyone. Certain Council members had known it was coming. Some had actively encouraged it, hoping the Dravok would eliminate humanity entirely and spare them the embarrassment of their incorrect classification. Ambassador Lisa Grant presented this evidence to the human government. The decision of what to do with it fell to leaders who had spent a decade watching their people die while the galaxy's most powerful civilizations looked the other way. We could release this information publicly, Lisa suggested during the emergency meeting. Let every species in the galaxy see what the Council did. Kevin Barnes shook his head. That would make us look weak, like we are begging for sympathy instead of demanding justice. John Morrison sat quietly at the end of the table. He had been invited to these meetings as a consultant, though he still felt out of place among admirals and ambassadors. But when the room fell silent, he spoke. We should go to them directly. Walk into their chamber and confront them with what we know. Let them see that we are not the same species they dismissed 10 years ago. Lisa studied him carefully. You want to go back there? After what they did to you? They judged me, John replied simply. Now, it is time for me to judge them. 3 months later, John Morrison walked back into the Galactic Council chambers. He was not alone this time. Behind him stood Ambassador Lisa Grant, Admiral Patricia Coleman, Captain Gregory Walsh, Dr. Samantha Price, and over 100 other humans who had distinguished themselves during the war. Each of them had been present during the original assessment. Each of them had been declared trivial along with the rest of their species. High Arbiter Zethkara watched them approach with something that might have been unease. His crystalline form pulsed with irregular light as he addressed the intruders. The human delegation is not scheduled to appear before this council. Protocol requires that Category 7 species submit requests through proper channels and wait in the designated observation area. John kept walking. He passed the boundary markers that separated trivial species from council members. He climbed the steps to the central platform, the sacred space where only the galaxy's most respected beings were permitted to stand. Protocol also required you to protect innocent life, John said calmly. You broke that requirement first. He held up a small data crystal. Every eye in the chamber focused on that tiny object. This contains complete records of communication between the Dravik hegemony and 14 council representatives. It shows that you knew the invasion was coming 6 months before it happened. It shows that you provided the Dravik with detailed information about our colony locations and defensive capabilities. It shows that you discussed the best methods for ensuring complete extermination of our species. Murmurs rippled through the assembled arbiters. Several representatives rose from their seats, demanding to see the evidence. Others called for the humans to be removed by force. Zethkara raised a limb, and silence fell. These accusations are serious, the High Arbiter said. But even if true, they do not change your classification. You remain a Category 7 species. You have no standing to bring charges before this council. Lisa Grant stepped forward to stand beside John. The Dravik had a higher classification than we did. They are gone now. Perhaps you should reconsider how much your classifications actually mean. We did not come here to beg for a new status, John continued. We came to explain something that your assessment failed to measure. You tested me in isolation. You measured what I could do alone. And based on those measurements, you concluded that humanity was worthless. He turned slowly, looking at each council member in turn. But no human being exists in isolation. Our strength has never come from exceptional individuals. It comes from connection, from cooperation, from the simple fact that when one of us falls, another one rises to take their place. You measured John Morrison and found him trivial. You should have measured what John Morrison becomes when he stands beside his people. Admiral Patricia Coleman spoke next. My fleet destroyed an enemy 4 times our size because every ship moved as one. Not because we have superior technology or stronger bodies. Because we think together. We fight together. We adapt together faster than any individual mind could manage alone. Captain Gregory Walsh added his voice. I captured an emperor who had never lost a battle in 600 years. Not because I am a better warrior. Because I had teams working in perfect coordination, sharing information instantly, adjusting our plans in real time. Dr. Samantha Price finished the point. We built warships that should have taken centuries to develop. Not because we had better scientists. Because we removed the barriers between brilliant minds and let them work as a single system. John looked directly at High Arbiter Zethkara. You can classify us however you want. But remember this moment. Remember what trivial creatures accomplished when you pushed them too far. And ask yourself what we might accomplish when we are no longer fighting for survival, but building for the future. He placed a data crystal on the floor of the central platform. Consider this your assessment. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the most powerful beings in the galaxy in stunned silence. The Galactic Council debated for 7 days after John Morrison's confrontation. Ancient alliances strained under the weight of the evidence he had presented. Species that had trusted each other for millennia now questioned whether their partners had participated in the conspiracy against humanity. 3. Council members refused to accept the changing reality. The Valkyrie, led by High Arbiter Zethkara, insisted that humanity's accusations were fabrications designed to destabilize galactic order. The Craxian Collective argued that permitting a trivial species to challenge council authority would encourage rebellion across 1,000 worlds. The Marth dynasty simply declared that humans were vermin who needed to be exterminated before they spread. Further, these three civilizations withdrew from the council chamber and began assembling the largest military force in recorded history. Over 12,000 warships gathered at a staging point beyond the Outer Rim, representing the combined might of empires that had dominated space for tens of thousands of years. Their target was Earth itself. They believed that destroying humanity's home world would break the spirit of the species and restore proper order to the galaxy. They had no idea how wrong that assumption would prove. Fleet Admiral Daniel Harper received word of the approaching armada while visiting the memorial that had been built for the victims of New Providence. The names of the dead covered walls that stretched for miles, including the names of Amanda Morrison and her 2 children. He stood before those names for a long moment before returning to his flagship, the Enduring. Dawn was the most advanced vessel humanity had ever constructed. It carried weapons that could shatter moons and shields that could withstand the heat of a star. More importantly, it carried communication systems designed by John Morrison himself. Systems that connected every ship in the human fleet into a single coordinated entity. Daniel looked at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy force. 12,000 ships against fewer than 2,000. The numbers should have been hopeless. But Daniel had learned during the war against the Dravok that numbers only told part of the story. All ships, he announced across the fleet-wide channel. This is Fleet Admiral Harper. We are about to face the greatest military force ever assembled against our species. They believe they are fighting individuals. They believe they can break us by destroying our home. Show them what humanity becomes when we stand together. The Battle of Seoul began at dawn on the 3rd day of April. The Allied Council fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel just beyond the orbit of Neptune and immediately began their advance toward Earth. Their formation was perfect, practiced over centuries of warfare. Every ship moved with mechanical precision. Admiral Patricia Coleman commanded the defensive perimeter around the inner planets. She had positioned her fleet in a pattern that looked random, but was actually carefully designed to exploit the enemy's predictability. Captain Gregory Walsh led the strike forces. Hidden among the asteroid belt, Dr. Samantha Price coordinated the communication network from a shielded station on the far side of Luna. The enemy expected humans to fight defensively, protecting their home world at all costs. Instead, Patricia ordered an immediate attack. Her ship surged forward in waves that seemed chaotic but were actually coordinated down to the millisecond. Each wave created openings for the next. Each captain knew exactly where every other captain would be at any given moment. The Allied Council forces tried to adapt. The Valkyrie commanders issued new orders to counter the human movements. But by the time those orders reached the Craxian and Morith ships, the humans had already changed their tactics again. The enemy fleet was fighting against a system that could think and respond faster than any individual mind. Gregory Walsh's strike forces emerged from the asteroid belt at the moment of maximum confusion. They targeted the command ships of the Allied fleet, vessels carrying the admirals and strategists who were trying to coordinate the massive armada. One by one, those command ships fell silent. And with each loss, the Allied fleet became a little less organized, a little more desperate. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of constant combat, with ships dying in brilliant flashes of light against the darkness of space. Humanity lost over 400 vessels and nearly 50,000 lives. But when the fighting ended, the Allied Council fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants fleeing back toward their home worlds. High Arbiter Zethkara was captured trying to escape aboard a damaged cruiser. He was brought before Fleet Admiral Harper on the bridge of the Enduring Dawn, his crystalline form dim with defeat. "You should have killed me," Zethkara said. "Mercy toward enemies is weakness." Daniel shook his head. Mercy toward enemies is strength. It is easy to destroy. It is harder to build something better. We are going to show you a different way. John Morrison broadcast a message to every inhabited world in the galaxy. He spoke not as a leader or warrior, but as the ordinary man who had once been judged and found wanting by the most powerful civilizations in existence. 10 years ago, I stood in the council chambers and was told that I was trivial, that my entire species was worthless because I alone could not demonstrate exceptional abilities. Today, I stand in those same chambers as part of a species that defeated empires, toppled tyrants, and survived everything the galaxy threw against us. He paused, letting his words carry across light years of space. We did not do this to prove our superiority. We did this to prove a truth that the old council refused to see. Greatness is not a quality possessed by individuals. It is something that emerges when individuals work together. Any species that can cooperate, that can support each other through difficult times, that can become more together than they are apart, has the potential for greatness. He announced the formation of a new galactic assembly, one that would judge civilizations not by their strongest members, but by their collective potential. Any species that wished to join would be welcomed. Any species that chose to remain apart would be left in peace. The remaining council civilizations debated among themselves for months before accepting humanity's terms. Zeph Kara himself traveled to Earth to participate in the signing ceremony. When asked why he had changed his mind, his crystalline form pulsed with complex patterns of light. I have studied humanity for 10 years now, he admitted. I kept trying to identify the exceptional individual who was responsible for their success. The brilliant general, the visionary scientist, the charismatic leader. I never found one, because their genius is not held by any single person. It exists in the connections between people, in the spaces between minds. I still do not fully understand it, but I can no longer deny that it works. John Morrison attended the signing ceremony as a private citizen. He refused every title, honor, and position that grateful humans tried to give him. After the celebration ended, he returned to Cleveland and resumed his work at the same manufacturing plant where he had spent most of his career. His co-workers treated him no differently than they had before the war. He was still the quiet engineer who fixed machines and helped others solve problems. He still ate lunch alone and went home to an empty apartment. But sometimes, when he looked at the stars through his window at night, he smiled. Not because of what he had accomplished, but because of what they had accomplished together. The Galactic Council had called him trivial, and they had been absolutely right. He was trivial. They all were. And together, they had changed the universe.